Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Senturus webinar on Power BI administration and data governance, keys to a successful rollout. Quick bit on our agenda for today. We'll do some introductions of today's presenters, talk a bit about role delegation in Power BI, workspace administration, data governance, content administration, issues, or not issues, but mechanisms for internal and external sharing. We'll do a quick overview of Senturus as a company and some additional resources we have to offer. And as I said, we'll do some Q&A at the end. Our presenters for today, first up, we have Todd Schumann. Todd is a BI solutions architect here at Senturus. Todd has over 21 years of business analytics experience across multiple industries. He is a Microsoft certified Power BI data analyst. And Todd's expertise lies in helping customers design analytic environments that are high performing, but also simple and easy to use. Todd lives with his wife and his two daughters outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. We also have Steve Narup here. Steve is our practice lead for the Microsoft Fabric practice here at Senturus. Steve is a Microsoft solutions architect, fluent in the entire Microsoft stack. Steve has more than a decade of experience overseeing architecture and design of data warehouse, BI, reporting, and dashboard solutions. As for me, I'm Steve Reed-Pittman, Director of Enterprise Architecture and Engineering. As usual, I'm here to do the intros and kind of keep things moving along. But for the most part, you're going to be hearing from Todd and Steve today. Todd will be doing the bulk of the presentation, and Steve will drop in for a few of the slides here and there. So you'll be hearing from both of them. Before we get into the meat of today's session, we're going to run a quick poll. Let me go ahead and start this up. My poll window disappeared on me, so one moment. Here we go. All right, so today's poll is: how confident are you that your company has properly secured governance across your current Power BI environment? And so do you feel like your Power BI environment is currently very secure, moderately secure, fairly insecure, or completely insecure? So the answers are coming in. It looks like the bulk of you right now are coming in kind of around the moderately secure level, but there's a little bit of everything. So clearly there's a lot of variation out there, and that isn't uncommon. There's a lot to look at and a lot to consider when you're securing your environment and trying to implement good governance. So again, looks like about 2/3 of you feel like your environments are moderately secure. A handful of you have very well secured environments. Some of you think completely insecure, and a few of you also down that fairly insecure zone. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these. And with that, I'm going to be quiet and hand it over to Todd.
All right, thank you, Steve. I did want to go back to the intro slide for a second and apologize for not being named Steve and having a beard/goatee. I feel like this could have been the greatest webinar ever if we were all named Steve and had similar facial hair. So total missed opportunity, but maybe next time. Anyway, time to get serious. Jumping into the meat today. Did want to touch on licensing. It's a whole other beast. I'm not going to get into all the specifics today. It's also constantly changing with some of the Fabric announcements that have been woven into the discussion. These are some links here that are to different areas of the Microsoft website where you can kind of get the latest information directly from the horse's mouth. If you need any additional help or have questions, be sure to reach out to Kay in the chat and we can set up a call to discuss. I'm going to get into some features today and capabilities that do require specific license types. So I'm going to try to call those out just so you're aware of them, but there is a lot of information in different flavors of the pricing and licensing out there. So use these links and hopefully you can kind of get a little more insight to those. Administrator types. There are essentially three main ones that you need to be aware of. There is the Microsoft 365 Global Administrator. This is the very top level. It allows you to create users, security groups, assign additional licenses. It also gives you full control over the lesser platforms like Power Platform and Power BI. The next level below that is the Power Platform Administrator. This gives you all the admin capabilities around Dynamics 365, Power Apps, Microsoft Flow, as well as full control over Power BI. And then the bottom one, which we're going to be mostly focused on today, is the Power BI Administrator, which is now known as Fabric Administrator. This is going to give you access to Power BI Desktop, the Power BI Service, Power BI Mobile, allow you to set up tenants, but it does not give you those upper levels like Power Platform Office 365. And again, just a little asterisk here. Fabric is changing things almost at a daily level. It's lots of constant updates to these capabilities. So as today, this is currently what it is, but I would recommend, bookmarking some of those sites on the prior slide, just so you can be aware of any constant changes that are happening. Admin groups are all configured through the Office 365 console. To do so, you can just go into your users, select manage roles, and you are presented with a big old list of types of administrators. I kind of highlighted here the three I am talking about, so you can see it's now called Fabric Administrator. It used to be called Power BI. There's also the Global Administrator and the Power Platform Administrator. So depending on how you want to allocate those groups, it's all kind of done through this screen here. And then one of the most common mistakes people make when rolling out Power BI is just to kind of open things up, let users jump in before they figure out the security in the user groups. And this is a big mistake. It's very important to determine the admin groups and your user groups before you roll things out. You need to define these global administrators, your Power Platform administrators, your Fabric administrators, as well as spending time creating things now, like your Workspace administrators, your data stewards, your testers, developers, and consumers by various business functions. I'm going to touch on a bunch of these user type groups in a couple slides, but just wanted to say, getting ahead of this and spending some time up front to figure out how you want to secure and roll out Power BI is going to make a huge difference when you let users in. And if you have this already set up in place, it's going to make your rollout much more successful. Outside of manually granting groups and user access, there's something called privileged identity management. This is a time-based, approval-based, role-activated tool that allows you to grant temporary access to workspaces and data sets. It really helps reduce the risk for excessive or unnecessary misused access and allows you to define start and end dates so you don't come back later and you don't forget to come back later and remove somebody who should have been removed as an administrator. So again, this is a newer feature. It is limited by a few prerequisites. Specifically, you need a Power BI Pro license and you have to have an Entra ID P2. If you have a Microsoft 365 E5 subscription, the good news is these are both included. So you'll be able to do this right away. And just for reference, Microsoft Entra ID used to be known as Azure ID, Azure AD. For some reason, Microsoft decided to make things even more complicated than they normally are by now renaming Azure AD to Entra ID. So if you see that, going forward, just know that it's essentially just Azure AD renamed. But if you do have those two capabilities or just the E5 license overall, you'll be able to use these privileged identity management capabilities, which are really nice. Going to jump into some workspace administration. Power BI workspaces typically contain various objects like dashboards, reports, Excels, Excel workbooks, data sets, data flows. You probably have some experience with these currently. Just to clarify a couple things, this is a little bit different than the My Workspace area. When I refer to My Workspace, I'm not referring to the crusty old desk I sit at every day surrounded by old coffee cups and empty bags of Funyuns. I'm talking about a folder in the Power BI service that is visible to just myself. There's no outside access. I'm the only user who can kind of see in here. So there's no collaboration. It's not something you really need to worry about securing. It's already kind of secured just for you and you alone. Outside of that, we have public workspaces that are made to share your dashboards, workbooks, data sources, etc. But it doesn't mean that you should open these up for users to go wild. Workspace proliferation is the #1 issue that we run into on failed Power BI rollouts. By not locking down the ability to create new workspace, you're letting users create duplicates and conflicting information that's extremely difficult to undo once it's begun. Even if you are okay now with your rollout, if you don't put some restrictions in place today, things are going to get out of hand before you know it. The good news is that it's very easy to prevent this with just a couple clicks. In the Power BI service, as an administrator, you have access to the admin portal, and there's an area under tenant settings around workspace settings. What you want to do is you want to prevent the entire organization from being able to create these workspaces, and instead you want to delegate these to a specific group. I mentioned, earlier on the slide about creating groups and roles, something called like a workspace administrator would be a good idea. Obviously, call it whatever you want, but a group of people who are responsible for deciding when and where to create additional workspaces versus just letting people go and put out, Todd's reports, Bob's reports, Steve's reports, and just having all these folders and workspaces floating around with duplicate dashboards, data sets, etc. You want to make sure that's not happening. So by creating this workspace administrator group and granting them the only ones who have the ability to do this, you're going to prevent that from happening. Steve is going to go over some workspace access and permissions issues. So I'm going to turn it over to him for this slide.
Hey guys, so when it comes to creating access or allowing access to end users for reports, we're going to get into this in a little bit, but they've really made it so that you don't have to provide every single user direct access to the workspace. We're going to get into apps very, very soon, but like Todd mentioned before, you really don't want to set yourself, put yourself in a position where you have to retroactively do things. And so when it comes to assigning these roles, contributor, member, admin, instead of doing it at a user level, we highly, highly recommend that you create Azure security groups, and then you assign each user to a specific role / security group, and then you are able to go in and just one time set up the user permissions in the workspace or the app, like we'll see in a second. But admins should be very rare. Those are the only people that should be actually creating, publishing, and deleting reports. And then also members, those are ones that should be able to see everything in the workspace. And contributors, I recommend really not giving them direct access to the workspace, but to the Workspace app. So definitely the contributor is the most prevalent or common, members second most, and then the admin is, again, the rarest permission that you should provide.
Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Up next is deployment pipelines. So if you are old like me, you probably at some point had a BI tool that lived on premise somewhere, and you had 3 or more environments: dev, test / QA, production, maybe additional ones. But since we don't have separate environments in Power BI SaaS, we can simulate that same approach using workspaces that are set up and secured for various business units, and to have a dev, test, and prod area workspace for each. You can manually create these workspaces in Administrator and move content around as needed and secure them, one by one. Or if you have a pro license and a PPU or a premium embedded capacity, you can use this deployment pipelines capability. And these are really handy. I think you can define parameters in your content to take advantage of the different servers, database names, schemas, etc., and then map them to the specific deployment pipeline area. So if you have, a data source that points to, SQL Dev, SQL QA, and SQL Prod, you can have a parameter in your content. You define that in the settings of these, and once you define them, you can just click a button, say deploy to test, deploy to production, and then update your apps. And it makes it very seamless and easy to kind of move stuff between those different areas. You also can define the user groups. So I mentioned again earlier, having like a tester group, a developer group, and then you're obviously your business user groups assigned into the appropriate buckets here, and spend the time up front to dedicate these to the groups and everything. And then once it's all set up, it's super easy to just click a button and deploy things when they're ready. So very cool feature. It is, again, tied to a couple elevated license capability type things, but if you can get this, or even just for a user or two who's going to do your administration, I think it's worth the cost.
One thing to note really quick about that one is, because you have 3 different workspaces, you shouldn't necessarily feel obligated to grant everybody access to all 3. More times than not, it's a handful of people that have direct access to test and dev, and then the end business users should only have access to production, most likely. So that's it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump into some data governance, talk about some self-service. So we can't have self-service without data governance, and this has never been more important today as more and more people are moving away from traditional IT-based control to self-service. So how do we do this? We have to push users to a single centralized data set that has been certified by your data steward group as a trusted single version of the truth. And to help support this early on, we can also pull in and upload Excel files and centralize them in Power BI to get the Excel community to help buy in. The single version of the truth is a term that's been around for years. In the past, IT would publish out models, and then users would build reports and dashboards against them, and they typically had a high level of confidence in the data they were using. The drawback to this was, it was a slow process. It usually required lots of back and forth between the business users and the IT. Sometimes those, details were lost in translation, and it was just slow to kind of get those updates as you needed them. Fast forward to today, users can now connect directly to databases. They can create their own calculations and filters, publish them right out to Power BI service. The downside to this is that not all users really understand or grasp all the complexities of the database or best modeling practices, and this can lead to incorrect data and incorrect calculations, as well as duplication, as all users are kind of just going on their own and just kind of using their own data sets. So somehow we have to find a common ground. And the good news is that with Power BI, it does give us controls to do so with a few clicks. The first thing we want to turn on is the sharing of data sets across workspaces. If you aren't sharing your workspaces, it's going to lead to having multiple copies of the same data set spread across multiple workspaces. And users are going to be constantly publishing new data sets because they can't find one that was already available because the sharing wasn't there. And by sharing a data set that is promoted and or certified across workspaces, users can then connect directly to that in Power BI Desktop or in the Power BI service and run and create content right off of that. It helps eliminate the duplication that would normally occur, and it also removes the need to allow users to directly connect to databases as the data sets are already exposing the fields and calculations they need. And then finally, the other benefit would be, that you can schedule your data refreshes directly on the server, and that can help keep your data fresh or as fresh as you need it to be using scheduling. I mentioned endorsements earlier, and there are 2 endorsement statuses to be aware of. The first is promoted. As a dataset owner, you can promote a dataset within your organization. This allows other users to see that there's a new dataset available. A quick heads up on that is just because dataset is promoted doesn't necessarily mean it's fully trusted or vetted. So you need to be careful with that. And to kind of have that next level of trust is called certified. Certifying a dataset is something that should be assigned to a custom security group as well. There are settings in the admin console to do this. So don't let your user base go and be able to certify things on their own. You want to have a group like a data stewards group. You want to make sure that your users are not able to do this, as the certified tag is going to lose credibility if anybody can just go and certify something. So a trusted group of data stewards, or whatever you want to call it, people who really know the data, who have spent some time testing the numbers, validating that the calculations, everything look correct, is going to be the best option here. And then lastly, one other benefit of endorsements is that by certifying it, it's going to cause it to bubble to the top of the list. So when users say connect to, in this screenshot here, get data, Power BI data sets, by having it certified, it's going to bubble at the top of the list when they search for stuff. So it's very easy to find them. And just for other additional, promoted gets put underneath them as well. So certified first, then promoted, then everything else. So these 2 tags can help, help users identify what they want to connect to and use for building reports, and hopefully eliminate the need for them to go out and do it on their own or kind of recreate something that's already been done. Good old Excel. BI tools have been trying to replace Excel for years, but it's still here and it's not going anywhere. And like most organizations, especially, in the beginning of a new BI tool rollout, there's going to be a user base that's still heavily reliant on Excel. So the good news is that Microsoft makes both these tools and they do work well together. Excel workbooks can be directly uploaded into Power BI service, and you can then use the Analyze in Excel features, which help bring us back to this centralized approach where everyone is using the same workbooks collaboratively, and people are getting away from these local files that live on their desktops, and they're just kind of going rogue and maintaining their own spreadsheets. So we want to kind of get to the centralized concept here. I would recommend, as far as this setting, is to make this sort of Excel process a one-way street. You don't want users to upload Excel and do some work and then export it back out, because then you're leading to more duplication. You're, again, no longer in sync with this sort of centralized view. So obviously, special circumstances may apply to do the alternative of people, export stuff out of here. But as a general rule of thumb, I prefer, as far as all security, is to kind of lock things down, maybe more than you would like, and then poke holes and make small exceptions for specific rules that need to kind of break that overall general rule. But it's always easier to kind of lock something down and let something out slowly than the alternative. And then the last sort of topic on this area is data flows. These can also be centralized and published to the Power BI service. There are several advantages to doing so. Number one, you have the ability to publish out the Power Query M transformations to the workspaces, and this allows it to be collaborative, so users can go in who have access to it, and if there needs to be changes to the transformations of the data, it doesn't have to just be you in your local version on your desktop. Other people can do it as well, assuming they know what they're doing. So it's a much better way to kind of manage that. Another nice advantage to this is to have a lower level of control on the data that's being refreshed. So for example, if you have, in your data set, a product dimension, most likely that's not changing daily. You may have new products throughout the year, but for the most part, that's pretty static, which is different than your sales fact table. So you can, by publishing data flows to the Power BI service, you have more control over the frequency of when tables are getting updated. So you could say, update the products table once a week, once a month, update the sales table, every morning after ETL, or even throughout the day if that's something that you're doing. Just gives you a lower level of granularity and control. Another thing I forgot to mention was that, again, this also can help remove access to the database directly. So if there's concerns about letting users into your database, you can kind of remove that by, pushing these data flows into the Power BI service, letting them interact with them directly there. So you don't have to worry about granting database access at that level. Okay, content administration. There are some areas in content that we want to review and lock down for a better user experience. The first one is custom visualizations. So if you've looked around on the web, you may have seen there's multiple vendors that provide free or sometimes paid visualizations, and they do some really cool things. I would just offer some caution that sometimes, there are dangers in these external visualizations. So it makes sense to kind of lock down these sort of third-party external custom visualizations, and then you can review them, and add them on a case-by-case basis down the road. Again, there's lots of settings and things we can lock down in the admin portal, but there is one that I would recommend you do day one, and that is just turn off or turn on the block uncertified visuals. And what do I mean by certified visuals? So there is always like a blue starburst. I'm not sure if you can see it in the screenshot in the bottom right, but there's this little sort of blue star next to the different visualizations when you're looking at them in the store. That indicates that it's Power BI certified, and that essentially guarantees that there's not going to be any external calls from Power BI. Anything that doesn't have that, I believe, should be blocked. Again, there may be exceptions to that, but you want to make sure that these are Power BI certified. So by sliding that toggle on, it's going to make sure that there's no external or no uncertified visualizations in there. And then furthermore, you can actually customize, add and restrict visuals in the admin portal. And doing so will add them to the list of visualizations that are available in the list when people are building reports in the Power BI service. which is different than the desktop. So obviously you can build dashboards and reports in both, but when you're working in the Power BI service, it's going to be a synchronized view. So everyone's going to have, the same custom visualizations available built in, which is when you're running on the desktop, there's not as much control there because they're not tied down to the service. So by doing so, you're kind of giving it the certified version to all your users who are going to the web. Row level security. This is kind of a generic topic, but is important here because it's another great way to roll out data sets to a large audience, as it allows you to present the same data to multiple end users. We're only going to see the data that they're allowed to see. So this eliminates the need to have multiple versions of the same data that maybe are hard coded to only show specific values. So you'd have to create like an America's version of the data, a Europe version of the data, something like that. That's just unnecessary. One single data set with row level security should be able to field all the different security requirements you have. So this capability is baked into the desktop tool, and there are multiple ways to accomplish this. You can hard code like a user group to a filter, such as, if I had a group called like North American sales, and I had a column in my data that was, based on region, I can hard code that to be North. And then depending on your requirements, that may be good enough. I could replicate that for north, south, east, west, something like that. That works well enough in some cases, especially for a small number of user groups. If you're looking at a much more large scale type of security, you need to create 100 or 1,000 plus different, ways to secure your data at the row level. It's probably not going to work. So in those cases, we use something more like a dynamic row level security option. We can grab information from the user at runtime so that we know who they are when they're logging in, and grab their email address or their other Microsoft attributes and use those to kind of secure it. So we can use like a security table that has mappings between different users to user email addresses, and tie that back to the main data so that it's only presenting the data that they should see. So again, depending on what your needs are, one or both of those might be the option for you. And another nice thing is that it's very easy to test these. They allow you to kind of use a view as feature in the desktop tool, and you can impersonate the various groups and roles and just confirm that the data is coming back the way you want. So before you publish it out, make sure you do some testing and use that capability to ensure that everything is working correctly.
So as I mentioned before, publishing and utilizing Workspace apps has become kind of our definite go-to when it comes to rolling out an end user report, primarily because it has, in association with the row level security, they've created what is known as like audiences. It's an additional feature that allows you to segment and really slice the report so that only specific user subsets or groups are able to view them. So Power BI has done a great job in terms of providing a whole host of ways in which you can kind of secure and curate the end state or user reports so that only people can see. Like row level security, you're slicing the data based on the user. Audiences, it's at the report level, so you're able to kind of present a single end URL report that looks like a single dashboard, but you're able to hide or show different reports based on the security group or I guess silo or department, however you decide as an organization to kind of separate or slice up your end users. And these settings, this is only done once, right when you create the Workspace app. So if you were to really roll out a single deployment pipeline, more times than not, you would only create a Workspace app for the production app or production workspace. So you wouldn't necessarily have to create, duplicate, or replicate one for dev, test, and production. That's just an awful lot to maintain. So that's what we recommend. It's not mandatory, but that's just our best practice recommendation.
Yeah, all good points, Steve. Thank you. Yeah, the audience capabilities that they've added are really nice and very user friendly as far as setting up to make sure that users are seeing the right slice of their data. So if you haven't looked at apps, I would recommend checking them out. Last topic of the day is just some overall guidance on external internal sharing. Again, this is a personal preference again, but there are lots of features in Power BI that are enabled by default that I believe should be disabled at least in the beginning. Obviously there may be a need to enable these as they come up, but it's much easier to, make exceptions, as I said earlier, to one of these rules than to kind of and take it away from everybody after it's already been rolled out. So things like publishing to the web, embed codes, exporting things out of Power BI, guest user access, business to business, letting guests share and collaborate, copying and pasting visuals, printing reports and dashboard. All these things are by default allowed out of the box with Power BI. I've kind of harped on a couple of topics over the last few slides, but one of them being, we want to kind of keep things in Power BI. We don't want to duplicate. And all these things do is they kind of take stuff out and they're static snapshots. They're no longer in sync. So I know people like to dump things to PDF and print things out, and that's always been something people have done, but I think it's a better way to kind of take it away and wait for people to ask and make exceptions to specific user groups who need to do that versus just letting everyone do these things. So just my 2 cents on these topics. I'm going to turn it back over to Steve to close out with some final thoughts.
So at the end of the day, this entire process, whenever you're rolling out an environment or Power BI reporting infrastructure, this is not a one-time event. It's really meant to be an iterative process and kind of a feedback loop. So you always want to set it up and set expectations so that people know that you as an organization are always in a position to implement and roll out the monthly updates that Power BI does consistently, and you guys are able to access and utilize all the newest, latest, and greatest features. So you really want to, and you want to get feedback from the end users in terms of how they're doing with it, if you need to make some updates or changes. And so just thinking about it from a process standpoint rather than a one-time event really helps. So whether that's setting up a shared document in terms of getting feedback or even utilizing the comments feature, which is a little bit more advanced, but that's something that I recommend just in terms of making sure that it's set up for the vast majority of your end users to get the most out of their Power BI experience. SRP, you want to take it away?
Sure thing. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
Just a little bit of wrap-up stuff here before we get into the Q&A. In terms of additional resources, we have tons and tons of free resources on our website. We always encourage you to go there and check that out. We've got tips and tricks, we've got blogs, we've got demos, we've got presentation decks and recordings of prior webinars. Hundreds of free resources on our website at senturus.com/resources, so please check that out. We also have a few upcoming events I want to make you aware of. Next week, we've got Microsoft Fabric and you. So if you're interested in the latest and greatest about Microsoft Fabric, join us next Thursday. We've also got a chat with Pat on publishing to and using the Power BI service coming up on October 18th. And another chat with Pat for those of you who are hybrid Power BI and Cognos shops. We've got a chat with Pat on Cognos 12 coming up in November. You can register for any or all of those at senturus.com/events. A little bit about us as a company. Here at Senturus, we provide a full spectrum of analytics services and enablement. We also offer proprietary software to help accelerate bimodal BI and migrations. We shine in hybrid BI environments. We've been in this business for a long time. No matter how big or how small your project, we can provide the flexibility and the knowledge to help you get the job done right. As I said, we've been in this business for a long time. We've been focused exclusively on business analytics for over 20 years. Lots of clients, lots of projects, lots of experience. We've got a team that's big enough to meet your needs, but also small enough to provide personal attention. So do reach out to us. We're always happy to help and eager to help you with your business analytics environments. With that, we're going to jump into a little bit of Q&A here. I know Steve already answered some questions in the Q&A panel in real time, so I'm just going to kind of jump around here. And not really necessarily in the order that things were presented, but there are a couple of questions here about audiences. Let me find wow, a bunch of questions are coming in now. So the first question that caught my eye was whether audiences are similar to the bursting capability in other tools like Cognos. I don't know if one of you can address that. I'm way out of my league here with the Power BI stuff, so let's see if our experts here have anything to say on that.
So what was the
question is
what was
whether
the comparison?
are audiences in Power BI similar to the bursting capability in other reporting tools? So Steve, I know you're not a Cognos guy. So bursting in Cognos enables you to essentially send out like a customized report that's using row level security based on like a group or like a user role, so that say like district managers get a bigger set of data in their sales report than like a I don't know the right words
Got
for
it.
sales.
No, I get it.
Than like a city manager, for example.
Yeah. So in a way, yes, you can set it up so that a specific role or position can see a certain number of reports. But just to be clear, it's not similar in the sense that it's setting up an outbound kind of email report. It's just setting it up so that only a specific role can see 5 out of the 10 reports in a workspace rather than all 10 reports. And again, it's only at the report level and not, you can use it in combination with row level security, but the audiences are simply, hiding or showing certain reports for specific groups that you kind of make up off the, within the app itself.
Okay, so it's more about report visibility and not about the
exactly
data that's in those reports.
Okay. Yeah, the bursting is going to give you almost like row level slices of reports delivered directly to your inbox usually, or like a local file, where this is going to be more of just a higher level of what pages of a dashboard do you see that are relevant to your role. So it's a little bit similar, but it doesn't go as far and beyond as detailed as a burst would be.
Cool. All right, we're going to go on to another question. Sabrina asks, here, let me just share this out. So what would you recommend for a production workspace with many reports? Should they all be used by the same audience, or would you create a new audience based on the type of report? That's probably your arena, Steve, I would think.
Yeah, so audiences, again, for give an example. So the production workspace, you would create maybe audiences for maybe like the last example, specific roles like account managers or even department level, finance, marketing, etc., so that when a user logs in to the app or goes to view the app, if they are only supposed to see financial reports, you can hide every report except the financial reports and even an Excel file. And then as an admin or maybe a different user such as marketing, they're only able to see marketing reports and not see any financial related reports. So it really is just at the report level. You're not filtering the data going into the reports, but you're just simply hitting the eye show / hide icon at the report level. I don't know. if that clarified things.
Thanks.
But yeah.
Let's take a look at some of these other questions here. Kayla asked about, with regard to sharing workspaces, is there a way to prevent sensitive data sets from being shared to unauthorized users?
Yes. So this is where you would actually utilize the endorsements / sensitivity labels. And in the settings of each data set, you're able to kind of explicitly say whether or not you want the end users to be able to export the data, reshare the data set internally within your organization, or just basically set it up to read only. But that's kind of the in-between setting that you can set it up, like kind of configure it so that people, if you want them to see it, they can see it. But if you only want them to read it and not actually share it externally or even within the organization, you can prevent that as well. So that's to kind of lock it down and prevent people from being able to export sensitive data, even into Excel. So that's within the data set itself.
And I actually took out a slide. There is capabilities in Power BI to integrate with Microsoft Purview, which has the ability to create custom labels like, private, confidential, things like that, additional labels outside of the, promoted or certified that I mentioned in the slide deck. I didn't want to get into the whole Purview topic, but if that's something you're interested in as well, there are additional capabilities that you can use to do so.
Cool, thanks guys. Another question here from Sabrina. Are imports using an on-prem gateway still secure when you're publishing to the web or using embed code? I'm not sure I understand the last part of that question, but just in terms of security, and I think this is also your camp, Steve.
Yeah. So
are those?
So publishing to the web and using the embed code, the sources when utilizing an on-premise gateway, it's still secure. But you need to make sure that you are publishing to the web inside a secure portal, if that's what you want to do, or embed it in an existing organizational portal. So you just want to make sure that you're not publishing it to a public forum, essentially, and you don't want to heavily rely simply on the security settings that are applied to an on-premise gateway to do the security on the other end from an end user point of view. So you just want to make sure that you're not embedding it or publishing it to an unsecure portal at the end of the day.
Great, thanks, Steve. Let's see here. Brian asks, does Power BI have a subscription component where it can deliver content via email? So this is a little bit like how bursting is often used in Cognos. So I think in the past there wasn't a feature, but there may be now.
So you can. There is a new component within Fabric that they just recently released, known as data activator. You can utilize that to set up a recurring email report if you want. It depends on how elaborate you want it to get, but the end users can actually, in addition, go in and hit subscribe at the top of, kind of in the toolbar at the top of the app, that will allow them to receive kind of a data triggered alert emails, either on a schedule or if a certain metric goes above or below a predefined number. So there are multiple ways to do it, but at the end of the day, without doing anything, the end users can still go in and hit subscribe. So there are varying levels of complexity, but yeah, the subscribe feature or button is probably the one of least resistance.
Great. It's nice that that capability is in there. Got a couple of questions here from Penny. Quick short one. To turn on sharing of data sets, to disable some of the features, do you have to be in Office 365 or MS 365 or Fabric or Power BI admin?
That's just
in order
so
to
they
do
all,
those things?
yeah, Power BI admin is a subset of the Power Platform and Office 365. So all three of them can do it, but all you need is the Power BI Fabric administrator capability to control. Almost all the settings I mentioned today are Fabric administrator type permissions that you can do at that level. Obviously, you can do it at the higher level as well because they have they kind of waterfall upwards. But yeah, none of that is needed to do those things.
Okay, so but the minimum, Todd, you said is Power BI or Fabric administrator
Correct.
role. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Penny also says there seem to be many things that can only be done in Power BI desktop. Our data set in the Power BI service is import mode and is only refreshed daily. Contributors cannot use Power Query Editor. Is that because it's using import mode?
That's really, they are doing their best to move everything that can be done in desktop to the online / Power BI service experience. But it's really a permissions thing. And so anything that you can do in desktop should just be you are correct in terms of desktop only being import mode accessible or creating the import mode experience. Creating any new reports in the service, you actually are kind of capped or held to utilizing existing direct query / live report connections of existing data sets. So it's kind of a yes and no answer, but to be clear, the import mode feature is only accessible via the desktop version.
Thank you, guys. A couple of questions about apps. So Paul asks, is it limited to one app per workspace, or can you have multiple apps in a workspace?
So workspace apps are held to a 1-to-1 workspace to app ratio. So yeah, you can only create one app per workspace.
One per workspace. Okay.
Yep.
All right, and then Benjamin has an app-related question also. So he says, we separate data sets and reports in different workspaces. Do you still recommend apps to control access to the data sets?
I do. I think if you're utilizing workspaces to segment the data sets, I think it's still beneficial to maybe even either replicate or create a new front end report within a different workspace that you're only going to use for the kind of the end users, so that you're able to still use the segmentation and workspaces for different data, but at the end of the day, you're still able to use a workspace to create the end user reports and kind of use those as the back end and the workspace as kind of the front end. So you're able to leverage both the benefits that come with small asterisks. That cross workspace utilization in terms of data sets can only be done via the premium per user or the premium capacity licenses. Just as an FYI. So I recommend that if you have a premium per user or a premium capacity license. If not, then you're correct. I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing all of that work if you have pro licenses. Sorry for the confusion. That was a good question.
Thanks, Steve. Brian has a question here that's near and dear to the hearts of many administrators. It says, for the periodic auditing component, are there reports or queries against Power BI metadata that provide insight into how the environment is actually being utilized? Is any of that readily available to admins?
The metadata of a, sorry,
yeah, I think what Brian is asking is there a way to see what the like relative utilization of different pieces of content are in your Power BI environment? Like, can you tell, oh, this query has been executed 100 times in the last month, or
so
stuff like that?
For auditing purposes, there is a workspace utilization report that I highly recommend using. It's called like a user utilization report, and it actually gives you like end user row level transparency into which users are opening up and viewing certain pages of reports, certain reports. If there's a bottleneck in terms of a long running query that's kind of bottlenecking the entire workspace or capacity, you're able to get some insight into that. But like I mentioned at the end, in terms of it being an ongoing iterative process and not a one-time event, I think utilizing that that user metrics report at the workspace level is very, very important. I think it's best practice to do that.
Great. Thanks, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we've got more and more questions coming in here. So another question from Brian: can you nest workspaces inside of one another to help with organization, and or is that on the roadmap? I know you sometimes have insight into what's coming, Steve, on the Microsoft side. But can you nest workspaces today, and or do you know if that may be possible in the future?
So there's nothing on the roadmap specifically about nesting the workspaces right now. But like I had mentioned a little bit earlier, if you have premium per user or premium capacity licenses, you are able to kind of set up that nesting functionality and cross workspace utilization of data sets like outside of one single workspace. And so you can kind of do it yourself. But if you're thinking about re-architecting an existing workspace or infrastructure, that's something that I can have a separate conversation about if you'd like.
Cool. Doug asks a question, kind of a follow-on question to the your earlier comments about auditing, Steve. He says, when you answered the question about usage auditing, it seemed to pertain to a single workspace. And is it possible to see that kind of data for an entire tenant, or is that workspace specific?
So it's workspace specific in terms of the utilization report that I was referring to previously, but there's also, they need to release a newer version of it. But if you go into the admin portal of your capacity/tenant, there's an embedded dashboard that actually shows you similar metrics in terms of utilization and the metadata being used at the user level. So I think just using both of them in combination will give you very good insight into which resources are being used, which are overextended, which ones are bottlenecked, etc. So I know they are actually working on an updated version of the embedded like capacity/tenant level utilization report, though.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Let's see what else. We're getting low on time here, but we'll get a couple more questions in. I'm going to take another Doug question here. I feel like we're playing Stump the Expert with you, Steve. So far, you're doing great. So you mentioned using certified data sets. It looks like the only way to allow a user to use a data set to develop a report in their workspace is to make them a member of the workspace that contains the actual data set. How then would you keep them from editing content in that workspace?
So if you want them to actually be able to have the freedom to create those reports along with the cross workspace data sets, you're kind of in a position where you need to make them an admin in order to really work with those data sets as needed. But at the same time, I would utilize or really map out the roles, access, and really sensitivity labels so that you can set up row level security specifically for them if necessary. So there are a lot of pulleys and levers that you can kind of set up to make sure that people are only seeing what they should be. But in terms of the role, there isn't a role specific like member, contributor, or admin that will give you exactly what you're thinking of right out of the gate. So you kind of need to really work through what people or certain people should have access to, what you want them to do, and then you need to kind of tweak all of the row level security, the object level security, audiences, and workspace level permissions so that they can only see what you want them to see, but also they can build what you want them to build. So it is possible. It's just you need to really clarify and understand what your requirements are for that user.
That can also kind of play into deployment pipelines too. You could have a higher level of being able to publish and create content in a development folder that's not visible to end users and go through the testing process of promoting it upwards when it's verified. But yeah, there's a lot of kind of complexity to that type of question.
Good question.
All right, thanks, guys. So we're at the top of the hour, so I'm gonna wrap things up here. If we didn't get to the question that you posted in the Q&A panel, we'll follow up with you after the webinar. We typically will also post a kind of a collection of the answers to the things we addressed here, so you can keep an eye out for that. And with that, I want to thank Todd and Steve for being here today and presenting and answering lots of great questions. And thank you all for joining us. It's always great to have you here on our webinars. You can always reach out to us. You can find us at senturus.com. You can email us, info@senturus.com. Todd, if you just jump to the next slide, just so people have that info. You can even call us if you feel like picking up the phone. We've got an 800 number. Always happy to chat with you. Also, Kay Knowles has been posting her Calendly link into the chat. So if you didn't see that, you can go ahead and click on that link if you'd like to talk to Kay and or Todd or Steve. We can get some time on the calendar to talk about your Power BI and governance needs. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. And we hope to see you again on a future Senturus webinar. Todd, Steve, thank you again.
Thanks, guys.